Press the Let's Go Live button, which means we've got to wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. It is T-minus 5 days until Christmas. Ooh, boy. You getting ready? I am. And so let's make sure that the stream is alive and well before we kick it off into high gear here. And it looks like YouTube is alive and well, along with the others, so let's get to it, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I'm a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. And today, closing arguments. Ghislaine Maxwel trial day 13. This is it. Jurors have the case now, and so we're going to go through the closing arguments. Of course, this is the closing. This is kind of the big kahuna. This is where everything comes down to the final connecting of the dots. Both sides are going to really try to make everything fit, everything that we've been talking about over the very short trial that this was. They're going to try to make it all fit, and so both sides are coming out with the best that they've got. We're going to check in and get our bearings straight with Judge Alison Nathan. We have a little bit of housekeeping stuff to go through. We'll talk about that briefly. And then we'll just get right into closing arguments. Alison Moe is the prosecutor who is representing the government, and she is now going to be delivering the closing arguments, and she's calling Ghislaine Maxwel a sophisticated predator. And so we're going to go through this because we've been fleshing this out. What has the theme been that the government has been saying? She is not a victim. She's a villain. She's been somebody who has been in cahoots with Jeffrey Epstein. She was just as bad as he was, in fact. There was no victimhood here for Ghislaine Maxwel. So you're going to see a lot of that theme be played out by Prosecutor Alison Moe. And so we'll break that down. And then we have some interesting new exhibits that came out. One is an hour-long video that is over on YouTube. Inner City Press uploaded this. Shout out to Inner City Press, doing an outstanding job today in particular. Uploaded a bunch of stuff over to YouTube. And so it's actually a video of the Epstein Palm Beach raid. And so I have a couple clips of that. It sounds like Alison Moe was presenting some of this to the jurors today. And so we'll take a look at that. I've also been able to splice in some of the different exhibits that I think they were referring to because we've seen a lot of them. They didn't get to see them, it sounds like, when they were doing closing arguments today, but I was able to go back through our prior slides, and I think I have the exhibits that they were referencing. And so we'll be able to make it a little bit more lively, a little bit more colorful than maybe otherwise we would be able to do because it's federal court. And then we're going to check in with the rest of the people who did closing arguments. So, of course, as we know, the prosecution goes first. We're going to hear from Alison Moe. Then the defense goes. Today we heard from Laura Menninger. Laura Menninger has been very active in this case. She, of course, is female, somebody who did a lot of the cross-examination of many of the victims in this case. And so she came out and delivered closing arguments. And then because the government, gets everything that they want, they get a second attempt at a close. It's called a reclose. And so they get an opportunity to come back and make their final pitch. And so we'll talk about that. So that was Maruene Comey, Prosecutor Maruene Comey, who came out and delivered the rebuttal close for the prosecution. And so that means we've got a lot to get to. If you want to be a part of the show, the place to do that is over at our community called watchingthewatchers.locals.com. There's a form there, looks just like this. If you're a member, you get access to that link, and you can go ahead and submit your question. We'll do our very best to get to them. We also have clips of the show that are over at the Clips channel, Robert Gruler, ESQ Clips. If you're looking for little individualized segments that you can share with family and friends, that's the place to do it. Okay. Ghislaine Maxwel trial day 13. We know this is it. We've got closing arguments right ahead of us, and then it's off to the jury. It's off for deliberation, and they've got a lot to deliberate upon because they've got 83 pages of jury instructions to get to. But before we dive into closing arguments, Inner City Press reporting, and once again, huge shout outs to Inner City Press. Did an outstanding job this entire trial, and today what was just on top of it. So he is reporting that early this morning, Judge Nathan was asking about these exhibits. Remember, this is America. We're supposed to have some transparency and accountability. We're supposed to be able to sort of see what goes on in these proceedings. And a lot of this case has been completely under seal. Everything has been redacted, not been able to see much of anything. And so Inner City Press and many others have been trying to sort of beat the drum to get access to this material. And so Judge Nathan was specifically inquiring about this from the attorneys today. Says, those exhibits, those things that have been withheld throughout the trial, I'm going to put those on the public docket. And there were several orders that came out from the court docket. And so there's supposed to be a bunch of exhibits that are being public. What Inner City Press is telling us, though, that as of this morning, they weren't public. But the point here is that they should be becoming public at some point in time. And again, this is only the redacted exhibit. So we're not going to be seeing anything that was unredacted. We're talking about the redacted exhibits that are going to be published according to the judge. She issued a couple orders demanding that they are basically notified about what is going out to be public soon. And that was scheduled for today. So we're going to see some additional exhibits continue to drip out. Judge Nathan says that they're going to be scheduling the closing arguments for the day. The government, of course, is going to go first, the defense, then we're going to have a rebuttal. Then they probably are going to begin deliberations today. And in fact, they did. So Judge Nathan says, anything else? Then they turn the box. That is the speaker's box, so the public can't see. Inner City Press is noting that can't really see much of anything. They're withholding all slides and all demonstratives and all defense exhibits. So as we go through these closings, the continued veil of secrecy rains down continuously, never stops. So we're not going to see much here, but we're going to try to piece together what we can, the best we can. So we see here the government prosecutors. We know this team. Damian Williams, the head U.S. attorney, not been involved really in this case. You see it's the 4 prosecutors down below. Today for closing arguments, we hear from Alison Moe. Alison Moe, we know, has used some pretty aggressive language throughout this trial, sort of coming out, and she has some of those mic drop moments that we've talked about. And so she came out and she did the initial round of closing arguments, and then we get the rebuttal close. And that is from Maruene Comey. Maruene Comey sends the rebuttal close, and we're going to check in with her a little bit as well. I also see Dr. EMB is in the house. Dr. EMB saying Merry Christmas to R&R Law Group with a very generous donation. Thank you, Dr. EMB. Very generous of you. Okay, and we'll get back to that. We'll shout you out there again. But I love you, Dr. EMB. Merry Christmas to you. Inner City Press continues reporting. Jury is now in. And so this is when closing arguments are going to start. He's noticing that Ghislaine Maxwel is in a beige sweater today at a defense table with Bobby Sternheim. Front row, Ghislaine's brother, Kevin Maxwell, and Leah Safian, another attorney who was there. Judge Nathan tells the jurors, got a lot to get to. We're going to break early for lunch. Then we'll come back and hear from Ms. Menninger. Then we're going to take another break. Then you're going to hear from the government. Sound good? Ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to proceed. Judge Nathan says, Ms. Moe, the floor is yours. Alison Moe, government prosecutor, takes the stand, walks up in front of the jurors, and she starts with a very crisp opening statement. Ghislaine Maxwel was dangerous. She targeted a girl whose father had just died, talking about Jane. Jane, of course, was the first victim that we heard from, who told us that story. They were very poor, very destitute. She fell into the lap of Giuffray Epstein, and you take it from there. Moe continues, says Maxwell ran the same playbook, and she did it again and again. She groomed these girls. She caused deep and lasting harm to young girls, and now it's time to hold her accountable. Meanwhile, Ghislaine Maxwell's over there just flipping through papers, sounds like. She's flipping through her hair, nonchalant as Prosecutor Moe is going through the litany here. She continues, she says, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard from law enforcement officers. You've seen documents. We've gone through phone messages. You've seen a little black book. You've seen the victim's name on it. You heard Juan Alessi say that he had to put those black books right by the bedside table. He had to follow the house manual, and they called him John. They couldn't even call him Juan. You heard all of that. And now, after you've seen all of the evidence, this is our summation. This is our opportunity to explain how all this evidence fits together. And after you see the connections, you're going to see that Maxwell is guilty. And ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to give you 8 reasons why she's guilty. Let's go through them. First, she says, Maxwell and Epstein were partners. They were in a romantic relationship, and Miss Maxwell even wrote this document. Now, the public, of course, doesn't see this document, but we have heard some of these sentences previously. Moe is reading from a slide, of course, is on the screen, and apparently we're going to see these slides at some point, probably highly redacted, but we should see them. Says, quote, Apparently, this is from Miss Maxwell, who wrote this. Says, quote, a couple for 11 years. Great partners, rarely apart, best of friends. Moe continues to read from this memorandum and asks the jurors, does that sound like a personal assistant to you? A couple for 11 years, great partners, never apart. No, it sounds like a lover. Moe says, when you're with someone for 11 years, you know what they like. And Epstein liked young girls. Moe says that Epstein couldn't have done this alone. It would be nuts. A single middle-aged man inviting a girl to a ranch in New Mexico saying, hey, why don't you fly out to my island in Little St. James? Hey, why don't you come to my mansion in New York? Yeah, that doesn't work. People who ask that raise red flags. That would set off alarm bells. And so Moe says Epstein couldn't have even done any of this without Maxwell. Maxwell was key. You saw photos of how close they were. And let's take a look at those. And so here, of course, they're not showing these photos to the press or to the media. But we did on this channel look through several different photos. Remember this one? And remember the narrative that we talked a lot about here. Victim or villain. Defense saying she's a victim. Jeffrey Epstein was the mastermind. Ghislaine was just following along. And now because Epstein is now dead, allegedly, they have nobody else to go after except her. So she's being victimized. She's being manipulated. But Jeffrey Epstein was the real bad guy. Prosecutors say differently. That's not true at all. Look at these two. They were little lovebirds. They're flying around. They're about to jump out of an airplane together. They're on a helicopter going to some faraway land. Here's Maxwell in a little mansion, just enamored as can be, just falling all over herself, nudging, doing the little cheek kisses. Isn't that cute? Here they are with their little puppy out there, maybe shooting, taking some photographs. Who knows what they're doing? But they're lovebirds. Here's the two of them smiling deeply at each other, looking into each other's eyes, bouncing around wherever they are. And so Moe continues this narrative, walks through the photos. These are all in the slides. Partners, yin and yang, two peas in a pod. They were inseparable. Even Ghislaine Maxwell wrote it down. And as she's continuing through the photos, we see some of the spicier photos come out. It says, now, ladies and gentlemen, you are looking at Maxwell and Epstein. They're swimming naked in this pool. And here she is massaging Epstein's feet with her breasts. Which I don't know what's illegal about that. Moe says, look at this exhibit. And this exhibit is Ghislaine Maxwell with lotions. Not shown to the press here are Juan Alessi's testimony about washing off the rockets. Not the rockets, the torpedoes. Remember the torpedoes? Juan Alessi had to wash the torpedoes off and return them to Ghislaine Maxwell's bathroom. All right, so this continues. Prosecutor Alison Moe says, all right, ladies and gentlemen, you have seen these reasons thus far, but now let's turn our attention to Annie. Annie, you can see down here in the bottom right, was the only victim who actually identified herself, Annie Farmer. She testified last and came out, and Moe says, we heard her story. Here's what we know about her. She was hoping to go to a good college. Kate, yes, she was alone a lot. She was dazzled by this impressive man who made her feel special. Jane was abused by family members. Jane, you can see down here. She was the first victim that we heard from. We heard that her father was an alcoholic. And so the story goes, according to Moe, Maxwell was hanging out with these girls alone. We heard from Annie. Annie said that when she got to Mexico, she found herself along with Maxwell and Epstein. Says this is obvious they were isolating these girls for a reason. Palm Beach was the center hub. They'd take them out to New Mexico, up to New York, out to Little St. James. Around the hub, isolating them from their families. We heard the 3 steps of grooming, the 5 steps of grooming. Moe says Even for Annie, it started very innocently. Started with Maxwell telling her to rub Epstein's feet. For Jane, it was very simple. Maxwell was out topless by the pool. They were just simply talking about boyfriends. They were escalating, and then things went from one to another. Maxwell ends up, we find out, touched 3 of the 4's breasts. Prosecutor continues, says, Jane told you. You heard from Jane. The first victim who took the stand, you can see her here. Jane said Maxwell did it to Annie too. Annie wanted to get off the massage table. These two stories corroborate each other. Maxwell touched these girls. It's not an accident. It happened again and again and again. You heard it from Jane. You heard it from Annie. Moe continues, says Jane didn't become Epstein's so-called goddaughter by accident. Maxwell is guilty. That's how she became his goddaughter. Here's what they did to Jane. This is Jane, and they show a photo up on the screen. But we don't get to see it. Moe says, we learned all about Jane. You heard about years of abuse that she suffered. We talked a lot about different documents from Jane. In fact, here's Jane's application to the Interlochen school, which we talked about. Her name, of course, is going to be redacted, so we didn't get to see those. There are flight logs. Again, her name is on there. We know that it's anonymized, but the jurors know what the actual name is. And they can see it on there on those redacted flight logs. And they can see her actual name on the school documents. And so they're showing it to them. Moe says that she saw Maxwell topless by the pool. And you know that because now you've seen Maxwell topless by the pool. Jane told you how Epstein walked her to the pool and then started rubbing on her. All of those documents got in, and we heard that story. That Epstein pulled Jane out from the pool, took her back, and we know the story. Flight logs come in, commercial flight records, private jet records. It sounds like all of those are now in front of the jurors. Prosecutor Moe says there weren't any scholarship boys. Isn't that interesting? All of these girls who got a bunch of money, Jane and Kate and Carolyn, all this interest from Epstein, there weren't any boys who got those scholarships. Wonder why that is. It says there were no selection criteria from Epstein, from Maxwell, from any of these people, beyond a pretty young and vulnerable girl. Jane was 14 and 15 and 16. And he was using torpedoes. 14, 15, 16 torpedoes. Okay. Do you see what she's doing here? We go on. She says, here's the massage room in New York. And we don't get to see what photos that she was talking about or referencing, but we're pretty sure it's this one. Government Exhibit 917R. And remember, the last time we looked through these, a lot of these photos are redacted and not on the walls. Now, all of these we are not going to be able to see. The next question was, of course, what of these photographs are the jurors going to be able to see? If any. They may see some of these photos or not. We don't really know. But when you go around the rest of the massage room and you take a look at the lotions and you take a look at the redactions on the wall, you can see that those photographs are probably something that's pretty provocative. Here's Government Exhibit 928R. You can see a little bit of this photo peeking out. Wonder what that is. Wonder what that photo is there. Interesting. Huh. Very, very curious. Now, as I mentioned, that was in the New York residence. So there was also a new video that came out today about the Palm Beach residence. And so we're going to take a quick detour and take a look at that. I also believe that this was played today during parts of the closing argument, but we're just watching it a little bit out of order, I believe. So here is what we saw, I believe, in court today. But again, we don't know because it's federal court. They don't tell us anything. This is the Palm Beach raid from the FBI some time ago. So they're just walking around. Now this is you kind of look at this room, you think maybe it's a guest room. But then you take a look at the bathroom, and it kind of looks like there's a lot of activity going on in there. So, you've got a whole, well, I think there you go. So, it looks like somebody might actually be using this room. Don't know who this is. But looks a little bit more used than maybe a guest room. Maybe not. I don't know. Not sure what that's all about. But, again, this is back in the 90s, and so you have these huge TVs. It sort of feels like a guest room more to me than anything. This one, I think, may be actually the master room. And so let's watch this one. This room's a little bit bigger in Palm Beach. And we actually saw several photographs from this room because we made note of those interesting pillows that have those interesting colors on them, right? Sort of look like kind of kidsy a little bit. Now, if you look in on these side tables, they don't look particularly nice. They look like they're kind of just set up there. And I don't see a black book anywhere. No black book. Now, when you turn around here, this is again in Palm Beach. This is not New York. Then we start to see this room that we also saw some photographs of. And this looks like it might be, the master. This might be, a him and hers type of a situation. And then watch what you see here when you get to this bathroom, to the shower. Look at all these lotions. What is all that? Look at all that stuff. Do people use all that stuff? That's a lot. Good Lord. All right. And so they just keep going around his house. And there's nothing really, too spicy here on any of these. We can see that I think this one is when they're outside now. And so, right, that's outside the... A little gym activity going on. Hey, so nothing too interesting, just kind of some officers, rummaging around through his house. Anything that, of course, is good and juicy, they're going to clip that right out. But I was curious about that shower. I mean, there's like 35 different tubes. What are all those tubes for? Don't you need like hair and body? Like that's it, right? Face maybe? 3 things? What do you need 35 things for? I don't know. Very complicated business. But the internet was going through here, and they were able to take some screen grabs of what was going on. So this officer had his firearm out at the ready when he was going through the Epstein residence. We also have, of course, a picture of a messy bed. Everybody likes to look at messy beds, of course. And then, folks, we have a highly censored photograph coming up. But this is a vomit warning. Heavily censored photograph, but a vomit warning just for the mental imagery that this is going to impose. We have a photograph, Exhibit 294, of the twin torpedoes. The twin torpedoes. Okay, so we've got the VOM sensor on there, so don't worry too badly about it. But if you take a look at it more closely, then you're going to see the twin torpedoes. There's 2 of them. And they're actually remote controlled. So you'll notice down here in the bottom right of the box, bottom left, I'm sorry, of the box, that is actually remote controlled. Which makes it, I think, I don't have any particular preference of remotes or no remotes. But I mean, if you're going to have Oh, no. All right, so let's carry on. Let's get back to serious business. This is a serious show. Alison Moe, government prosecutor, continues on. Now that we've taken that little bit of a detour, Alison Moe says, ladies and gentlemen, you've seen all of that. Let's go back to Jane. Jane told Matt she had a godfather. Jane, of course, was the first victim that we heard from. We also heard from her boyfriend, Matt. Matt came out and testified and said she had to do things that she didn't want to do. Says there was also a woman who made her feel comfortable. Matt told you, ladies and gentlemen, that there was a woman in the house who made her feel comfortable. You know it. I know it. That woman was Ghislaine Maxwel. Moe says you heard expert testimony. Dr. Rocchio came in here You can see Dr. Rocchio. I took her photograph here. And she testified as an expert witness. She told you all about grooming. We went through the 5 stages of grooming. She said victims are less likely to tell the closer they are to the perpetrator. And guess what? It's true. Ghislaine Maxwel was like a big sister to Jane. You heard from Jane. You heard how much she looked up to her, how much she respected her, and then she was abused by her. That's why she didn't speak up. And Dr. Rocchio told you so. Moe continues, says Jane also named 5 women who participated in those group activities. You remember them. And we talked about them here at length. Emmy, Kelly, Ava, Sophie, and Michelle all participated in group activities. Jane was there and she named them. Now, Moe is coming out and she's trying to rebut the defense's argument. If you recall, the defense came out and they brought up somebody named Ava to the stand. And they said, hey, Ava, did you ever participate in these group activities? And Ava said, no, I did not. And so the defense brought up Michelle and they said, oh, how about you, Michelle? You were there on the Epstein properties. Did you participate in these group activities? And Michelle said, absolutely not, did not. But Moe says, even though Jane identified people named Ava and Michelle, she never gave you their last name. There were many Avas in the Black Book. There were many Michelles, 3 of them, in fact, in the Black Book. So just because they went out and found one Ava and dragged her into court doesn't mean it's the Ava that Jane was referencing. Moe calls this entire thing a spectacle and a sideshow. The prosecutor continues. She says, ladies and gentlemen, you heard Annie tell you how when Epstein touched her when they were at the movie theater in New Mexico, as soon as Maria, her sister, looked over, he stopped. Annie flew to New Mexico. He thought it was about a scholarship. Her mother told her, and they all thought it was about a scholarship. And when they were out there, that's when Maxwell really started ratcheting things up. We know the stages of grooming. You start small and you work your way up. Maxwell did the same thing again. The same thing that she did with Jane. She wanted to show Annie now how to rub Epstein's feet. You saw the photo of Maxwell massaging his feet with her breasts. Okay, this was not part of a mentoring program, says Moe. This is not Ghislaine Maxwell's lovely school of massage. Okay, she's massaging his feet with her breasts. This is not appropriate. This is not a massage. Moe says that in this process, Maxwell was trying to normalize this. Why? Because she was a predator. She insisted on giving Annie a massage and she touched her. And none of that was therapeutic. This is not on a list of spa treatments anywhere in the world. I don't care if you go to the Four Seasons or the Ritz-Carlton. Not acceptable. Prosecutor continues and said, you heard from FBI agent Mulligan. Mulligan remembered that Annie told him that Maxwell had bought her a pair of cowboy boots. And during that buying of the boots, that he touched her breasts. And then in 2006, Annie told the FBI the same thing. And now let's change gears, says Moe. We're going to talk about Carolyn now. You remember Carolyn? Carolyn was the 3rd victim who came out and testified, had a little bit of drug history, a little bit of abuse history. Moe says that Carolyn was introduced by Virginia Roberts. Remember Virginia Roberts, Giuffray, the woman who was in that photograph with Prince Andrew? Yeah, Virginia Roberts, also making allegations against the prince and Dershowitz in civil suits. Says Roberts was the same girl that Juan Alessi remembered. Juan Alessi, of course, Epstein's housekeeper. He said that at Mar-a-Lago, Maxwell told him to pull over and went to talk to her. Alessi says he's just driving down the road. Maxwell says, oh, there's an easy victim. Pull over. She hops out and goes to talk to her. Carolyn continues and says that Virginia told her how to make money. Very easy, says Virginia. All you have to do is go give massages to wealthy men. And then Virginia and Epstein started going at each other right in front of Carolyn. This is the massage room where it all happened. And boom, Prosecutor Moe throws it up on the screen. And here is the master bedroom, you see, of a drawing of a young girl pulling down her underwear. Remember that photograph? This line was highly debated about in pretrial proceedings, and actually, in fact, during the trial. There was a photograph outside the master bedroom with a very provocative photo. The defense wanted to keep that photo out because of what it implies. Here it is. They're getting that in front of the jury, it sounds like. Moe says there's a drawing of a young girl pulling down her underwear right outside the master bedroom. And what does that imply? Easy. It says that Maxwell understood what was happening here. This was the beginning of all of this abuse. Multiple people would be involved. Even Sarah Kellen would call Carolyn. Maxwell was orchestrating the whole thing. And if you go back through the record and if you take a look at all the exhibits that we submitted, you're going to see very clearly, even phone messages corroborate Carolyn's testimony. What she said is accurate and true because we have contemporaneous documents from that time. You can see here, ladies and gentlemen, that we were taking messages on these message logs. There was a record for Mr. Epstein, Tuesday at 8 a.m. Please call, and then we get the name. This is when the message came in. It was for somebody, for Jennifer. Then we have the name. Please call so-and-so. Prosecutor Moe is saying that corroborates everything. She came in here and she told you that she was taking messages and she was getting abused. Look, we got a message book. She took a message on it. Moe says, and speaking of these massages, isn't it curious that all the masseuses are female? And by the way, who needs this many masseuses? Why do you need so many of them? Why can't you just have one or two? And by the, if you're really looking for a good massage and you've got maybe some, problems with your lower back or something and you need some real good therapy, maybe you get a medical massage or a therapeutic massage. Why are all these masseuses females? Why don't you go and get somebody who's an actual therapist, who's 400 pounds, who can dig his elbow into your back and correct your misalignment? I don't know. Good question, says Moe. The notes say mom and dad, and there's all these different weird things happening in these notes for masseuses. None of this is legitimate, she says. In fact, here's a look at the employment record over at Mar-a-Lago of Sky Roberts. That was Virginia's dad. And so she's going through different documents and different records. She says, here's an entry. Melissa, Carolyn's friend. When you're looking at the list of the masseuses, it doesn't say, the name of so-and-so who is highly credentialed. No, it says it's Melissa, Carolyn's friend. This is a black book of illegal activity, is what she's saying. And this proves that Maxwell is guilty. In the front row of the gallery, side note, we see that Kevin Maxwell and Isabel Maxwell, Ghislaine's sisters, are leaning over. They're looking at the exhibits that were handed to them, but of course the public couldn't see them. We change gears and we talk about money a little bit. Moe says, back in 2002, Epstein paid $5 million over to Maxwell. So when you add it all up, it's a total of $30.7 million. All the financial transactions, Ghislaine was funneled over $30 million. Now ask yourself, ladies and gentlemen, what was Maxwell doing for Epstein that was worth $31 million? Can you guess? Was she organizing parties for him? Was she going horseback riding with him and flying around on helicopters with him? Was she giving him business advice? No, none of that is true. Epstein wanted to touch underage girls, okay? That's what this was about. Maxwell knew what the money was for. She delivered the goods. She got paid for it. She is just as guilty as he is. This is not a victim situation. This is a willing accomplice. This is somebody who is participating in the underlying conspiracy through and through. Moe says, Virginia Roberts at that time was 17. She was flying on the jet with Epstein and Maxwell. Virginia brought Carolyn to the Palm Beach house, and when Carolyn was 14, it was a pyramid scheme of abuse. You bring them in young, You age them out, they bring in somebody else young, they age out, and your little cycle continues. Moe continues. Now, the defense came out, ladies and gentlemen, and tried to tell you when Maxwell dated Ted, the guy from Gateway Computers, or whatever he was from, I think it was Gateway, that she was no longer around Epstein. They came out and they tried to tell you, oh, Ghislaine Maxwell moved on. She found somebody else. She swiped right. And she found somebody who was going to make her happy. It wasn't Epstein. Moe says, nope, false on that one. Not true at all. In fact, she was still lady of the house. Look at this manual. I've got a document that says exactly how this household is run. Take a look at it. Here's what it says. And when you look at Maxwell's list, when you look at these little books that she was keeping, it's very curious. There were no boys on Maxwell's lists. She slept in a bedroom with a bathroom of lotions and another bathroom where the torpedoes were stored. And Epstein paid Maxwell millions of dollars. She knew. Yeah, she knew. She was complicit. In fact, she is guilty. And so the prosecutor now changes gears and says, let's talk about the charges, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be very complicated, as we know. A lot of charges, a lot of testimony here. They go through this. And she says, let me also respond to what the defense has said. In their opening, Bobby Sternheim and Maxwell's counsel said that Maxwell is being blamed for something that a man did. Epstein. They're trying to make this all about him. But this is not about him. Ghislaine Maxwell, says Moe, made her own choices. This case is about manipulating young girls. And the case is about money. Carolyn got a few $100s. Maxwell got $30 million. Do you see what happened here? If you've been following this channel for some time, you remember that Bobby Sternheim's opening theme, her opening statement, I just made a short about this on YouTube called Trilogies. It was a trilogy with beautiful alliteration on top of the trilogy. She said that this entire case was about money, memory, and manipulation. That was Bobby's theme. Prosecutor Moe is coming out and flipping that around, saying, yeah, this case is about manipulation. Easy, it's about manipulating young girls. Yeah, this case is about money. Easy, Carolyn got a few $100s. Maxwell got $30 million. And this trial is also about memory. You heard about it. You heard about trauma. That's what they did. They caused the trauma. So she says the defense is here arguing that Maxwell was, too busy to commit these crimes. But Maxwell had personal assistants. She had a woman to walk her dog. She ordered sand to be delivered to Epstein's private island. That's how much free time she had. So she had plenty of time to orchestrate a global scheme. Prosecutor continues and said, their defense expert, they brought out this woman, Elizabeth Loftus, that doctor who claimed that she was world-renowned, who wrote all those books. She tried to come out here and convince people that they saw Bugs Bunny at Disney World. Yeah. So, okay, that's fine. She can do that. She admits that she's an advocate for the defense. She also admits that she's made a lot of money. They tried to bring up that she represented Durst and Weinstein, but that didn't come out. And so Moe says, ladies and gentlemen, very simple. There is only one conclusion here. That Maxwell is guilty and you should convict her. Use your common sense. You will reach the only verdict consistent with the evidence, and that is Maxwell is guilty. Boom, she closes the binder, grabs it, turns around, walks around there, sits down, high fives all the other prosecutors. Yeah. And Judge Alison Nathan says, we're going to take a lunch break. It's now 11:16 a.m. And so we don't know how long that went. Could have been an hour, probably maybe an hour and a half. Not sure how much time they had or whether she used the full length of it, but pretty good statement. Went through a number of different victims and we saw her connect the different dots. That was Alison Moe delivering the closing argument for the prosecutors in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. Now, the government gets another crack at this but let's check in to see what the defense had to say. Before we do, we have to take a look at what Bobby Sternheim was making a motion. And the judge excused the jurors, of course, for their lunch break and said, nobody talk about this case. So Bobby Sternheim says, all right, Judge, hey, while we're taking a little bit of a break here, got a problem. The massage table that's coming in from California, that's not enough for interstate commerce, okay? Just the fact that something crossed state lines, the fact that we have a massage table that was created in California or moved from California, whatever, not enough. So we want a limiting instruction, which means they want the judge to tell the juror something that's going to correct their interpretation of the rules. Now, Inner City Press is telling us that the defense keeps arguing for a mistrial. Judge says, nope, not going to happen. I deny the motion for a mistrial, and it goes on. Ghislaine Maxwell's defense team is now up. They have to deliver their closing arguments, and they do so. We take a look at the defense team, but we only see one person delivering the closing arguments. That is going to be Laura Menninger. We've talked a lot about this. Made note that Ghislaine Maxwell has sort of an even split of a team in terms of gender. Typically, because this is a crime involving women, it's kind of good to make sure that women are represented and that you are, of course, not having a group of men beat up on women. It's just not a good look. Generally speaking, I think most defense attorneys would agree on that point. And so we can see here that Laura Menninger has been very active in this case, predominantly been brought forward to cross-examine the victims, whereas Jeff Paliuka and Christian Everdell brought out, generally speaking, Jeff Paliuka, I think, did some questioning of one of the victims, but generally speaking, they have done more of the technical cross-examinations, whereas Laura Menninger has really been active in more of the victim lines of questioning. So Laura Menninger is now out. Judge says, Ms. Menninger, floor is yours. Closing arguments whenever you're ready. And so she comes out with another strong statement. I am not here to defend Jeffrey Epstein. He is not my client. The U.S. presented evidence like a sensational tabloid. Everything you saw here, private island, photos, New Mexico, New York, airplanes, different people. We saw a lot of flamboyance. We saw a lot of activity. We heard a lot of things, didn't we? Those were things that Epstein did. Those were Epstein's crimes. But Ghislaine Maxwell is not Jeffrey Epstein. And now she continues on, and she's going to dig into some of the missing gaps. You saw a lot of photographs. You saw all the tabloid pictures that they showed you. You saw the pictures of the bedroom, of under the bed. You saw in the drawers. You saw all the things that they had. Where are the other photographs? There were 37,000 of them. Where'd those go? Yeah, and who was in them? Yeah, you don't know. That's because they didn't bring you those photos. You saw pictures. There were folders. There were binders. But they brought you the most innocuous photos of a couple that was once together. They showed you the picture that they wanted you to see. They showed you a smattering of 25 photographs out of 37,000. They're not telling you the full story. Menninger's fired up. Says, this is straight up sensationalism, Your Honor. I mean, ladies and gentlemen. There's the lack of evidence. Let's start there. Jane hired Robert Glassman 2 weeks before she spoke to the FBI in 2019. The lawyers like Boyes and Schiller, they helped set up the Epstein Victims Fund. So the victim, Jane, who was so poorly abused, went and hired a lawyer right before she spoke to the FBI in 2019. And those same people that she hired, they helped set up the Victims Fund. She says, let's turn to manipulation. We can go through the stories of each individual witness if you'd like. Their stories have changed. Carolyn had a lawyer in 2008. Back then, there was a story about Epstein and Sarah Kellen. She also sued. And in those lawsuits, weird, she didn't mention Ghislaine Maxwell. She sued everybody else. She sued the people who were really responsible for this. But you know whose name was not in that lawsuit from 2008? Weird. Ghislaine Maxwel. Menninger says, we were asking questions about the boots. Where are the boots that you say that they bought you? It was in your testimony. We had to ask those questions. And Menninger says that the truth about those questions was manipulated over time. They've constantly twisted the stories. They bought boots, but the boots were something nefarious. They're making out Ghislaine Maxwel to be Cruella de Vil or the Devil Wears Prada, all rolled up into one, she said. You heard from the government's own witnesses. Let's talk about the pilot, Vysotsky. When he came out to testify, the government called him, remember? He took the stand, and you heard him say that when he looked into Jane's eyes, the moment she stood on that plane, he thought that she was a fully grown, mature woman. He said it. The other pilots said it. They didn't see any bad activities going on those airplanes. And so them trying to say that her being there is an illegal act is conflating the issues. The pilot himself said she looked older. The U.S. said that she was sometimes in the room when it happened. But Jane said she wasn't sure. And Ghislaine Maxwel didn't entice Jane to travel anyways. Jane couldn't remember a lot during her testimony, if you recall listening to that here. Menninger continues. It says, hey, Jane, you heard her say that she went to Epstein's house every week. But no one took the stand to say that she spent any time with Ghislaine. Who are these relatives? Annie's mom came. We heard from several people all talking about this. Everybody came in and testified. No, never spoke to Maxwell. We heard about Epstein's house. Yeah, she was there all the time. Every other week she was there. But Maxwell never came up. Larry, as we know, said Jane was fully mature. No pilot testified that he saw Carolyn or Kate or Annie engage in anything that was problematic. Nobody talked about, none of his employees talked about a culture of silence. You just got the sound of silence. One got a 2-time burglar with an axe to grind, talking about Alessi, which we're going to get to. Menninger said that the prosecutors came out and they told you that you'd learn that Ghislaine was in the room. She was there. She was right there as all of this was going down. But if you ask Jane about that, whether Ghislaine was in the room, guess what? Jane can't remember. And there's no motive anyways. They say a happy, educated woman in her 30s would end her career as a facilitator of abuse. Yeah, that makes sense. Ghislaine Maxwel, this very rich, very famous, well-to-do socialite, somebody with an infamous father, somebody who has sort of, been in the tabloids for a long period of time. She's going to give all of that up to jump into a life of abuse. Sure. Is there any evidence for that? She says. Yeah, Epstein. He was the manipulator. He manipulated this whole thing. Do you know anything about Ghislaine? Anything about her lifestyle before Epstein or after? She argues, she says, maybe it was Giuffray who needed Ghislaine and her connection, and not the other way around. Menninger moves forward, says, I want to talk about Jane's age now. Let's pin this down. Very important issue. This is a case involving the allegations against minors. Let's talk about it. Jane said her father died at age 13. Tragic. Absolutely tragic. I can't imagine. But then she's applying to go to an arts camp that costs $4,000 per person. Huh. And if you go back through the records at the Interlochen School of Arts, they didn't even apply for financial aid when any of this happened. And then we move on. We get to see her travel records of Jane. This is the person who says that she was indigent, right? She had no money. Father was poor, broke, died, lost everything. Very, very sad. But if you look at her travel records, she's flying over to Italy. There's a flight I'll show you. Shows Jane flew at the earliest age at 16. So if her first flight is at age 16, what does that mean? Menninger says very simply, Jane got her dates wrong. In a case that's all about dates and all about travel. This poor homeless Jane, she's so poor and alone. She's traveling all over the place. $4,000 for the Interlochen School of Arts, flying over to Italy. She says she sang for Mike Wallace's 80th birthday, but she was 17 by then. So she just got these dates wrong. Has no idea what she's talking about. The government just said, we'll assume your first time to New York wasn't the Lion King data. Remember this debate? Jane said, I went and saw the Lion King on Broadway. Or I went and saw the Lion King. Well, there's two different Lion Kings. There's the Broadway play and there's the movie. The movie came out in 94. The Broadway play came out in 97. If Jane saw the Broadway play, then she was 3 years older than if she saw the movie with Epstein. That would make her 3 years older. That was a big issue in this case. She said, I don't know, to play the movie, I don't remember. Would you forget something like that? Dr. Loftus said no. She's a person who is an expert on memory, world-renowned, in fact. Said this is unremembering. Okay, she's trying to remove a fact that wrecks a fake story. She wants the story of this abuse to be true, but if you go back, she was much older, 3 years older than what they're claiming, because she didn't see the Lion King. She saw the Broadway play. That makes her older, and the other travel records support that. Menninger says that Jane also talked about these group activities. Says, you have a right to evidence, okay? She gave names, multiple names. Not one of these women called the police. They said Sophie was blonde and pretty and married a race car driver. She said Ava joined in with Sophie. Okay, all these interesting names. She talks about Emmy and Michelle. They now say it could be any old Michelle. They're talking about these things happening. Doesn't the government have a burden to prove that? If they're going to bring Jane out here and say, yeah, there were these group activities taking place with a number of different women, including Sophie, Ava, Michelle, Jane, Emmy, shouldn't they have to support that? Shouldn't they have to bring out an Emmy or a Michelle or an Ava to come out and say, yep, I participated in that. I can corroborate that. But we now, as the defense attorneys, are bringing out the Michelle that we think it is. We're bringing out the Ava that we think it is. And we put them on the stand, and guess what? They said it wasn't us at all. We didn't participate this. We didn't do that at all. And so what the prosecution is saying now, well, there are many other Avas out there. So Jane was talking about another Ava. And the defense is saying, that's great. Go get her. Go get the Ava. Go find her then. If you say there's a million different Avas and you found an Ava in his book or in the black book or wherever you saw any of these names, go get them. You said it was Ava and Michelle. We went out, we found an Ava who actually dated Epstein for a long time, brought her in here, sat her in front of the jury and say, did you do any of this stuff? And guess what she said? No, none of it. Did you ever see anything that was wrong? No, none of it. So if you think it's maybe an Ava out there who is out there to corroborate Jane, go and get her. Because we went and found out an Ava that we found, and she seems to support our story. In fact, it seems like it's pretty okay PG-13 place over there. You have to go get it and support your arguments, not us. So she says, they now say it could be any old Michelle. Jane said it was the Michelle who hung out with Emmy. Michelle said, I'm a housewife. This is a pattern of Jane picking names out of people she met in Epstein's world. Jane is just throwing darts at a board. Of course, Ava and Michelle came up here and took the stand and said, we didn't participate in any of this stuff. Because it never happened, that's why. And Jane is just now getting all, out of her mind, making stories up. She's just picking names out. Oh, Sophie and Emmy and Michelle. Okay, well, we called Michelle, she didn't do it. We called Ava, she didn't do it either. So who are these people? Any old Michelle? You need more evidence than that, she says. And Menninger continues and said, she also told you that she met Donald Trump. But she has her time frame all wrong. She's trying to insert Ghislaine into the story after the fact. Her lawyer, Glassman, told her it would help get money. We didn't get to call Glassman into trial as a witness. Menninger says, when Jane was testifying, she says she was in a movie called 5 Monkeys, but there is no movie called 5 Monkeys. There is a movie, however, called 12 Monkeys, and she claimed that holding hands was also abuse. Okay, so she went to New York mostly to see her sister, and when she was there, Ghislaine was nowhere around. So you have this woman who can't even remember what movie she was in, 5 Monkeys versus 12 Monkeys with Bruce Willis, also claimed that simply holding her hand was some sort of abuse. So you've got this woman who's like ultra fragile, who can't remember anything, who went to New York to see her sister anyways, and Ghislaine was not anywhere around. Menninger changes. He goes, let's go talk about Annie now. We read through Annie's diaries. Did you ever see anything about Ghislaine Maxwel in those diaries? No. Because there isn't any mention in there. Epstein was not in the room when she got the massage. Annie told the compensation fund that the touching on her chest were gropes. And how much money did she get? Oh, yeah. $1.5 million. That's all great. Neat story. But let me ask you this. What evidence is there that Ghislaine Maxwel knew about any of this? Okay. Yeah, so Annie got abused. Terrible story. Epstein groped her breast. Got it. Awful. But Epstein wasn't in the room when she got the massage. Ghislaine Maxwell's not in Annie's diaries anywhere. She makes no complaints about this, receives $1.5 million. So what does this have to do with Maxwell? Menninger says. And she starts to undermine Annie's credibility and say, you know what? We'll be very curious to actually get those journals because we don't have those. If we had them, we might be able to read them and see what's inside. If we were able to look in those journals, maybe we could piece this together. Maybe we could see that she just got it wrong by a year, meaning she's 17 when she went there. When did she go to Thailand? The records say she was 18 through Dusseldorf. Her mother was there. So it's off by a year, meaning she's not a minor. She's 17. Records say she was 18. Look at the documents. Menninger continues. Now let's talk about the boots. Annie talked about the boots. She said that she kept these boots for a real long time. It's kind of a weird thing for the victim of a heinous crime, somebody who is abused in the worst of ways, to keep the boots that her abuser bought for her. Kind of strange. So when I asked her, Annie, why'd you keep those boots? She said it's pretty simple. Well, the government didn't ask for them in 2006. Oh, the government didn't ask for them. Yeah, so she just threw them in the back of a closet somewhere. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as you recall, I admitted those boots into evidence as an exhibit. And so you're going to get to see those when you're back there deliberating. And I want you to take a look at those boots very closely. Take a look at the bottom of the boots. Take a look at the heel. Take a look at the sole. You're going to see exactly how worn they are. This is a woman who had been wearing them for decades because she liked those boots. Because she got them from somebody who was a friend of hers, somebody she admired, not an abuser. And she relished them. She held on to them. Or maybe the argument is, these were collateral. These were evidence. This was her payday. She was going to hang on to these things and collect a check. And she did, didn't she? $1.5 million. And Menninger moves on and says, you know some other interesting things about that little story about New Mexico? Where is that chef from the ranch? You know the chef that was out there? She said she didn't remember or doesn't know or doesn't think there's a chef. He was there. I mean, she was eating his food. Why doesn't she recall that? And where are her diaries? What you got was a photograph of the front and back of a diary, and you got a few pages of it, but you did not get the rest of it, did you? Why is that, ladies and gentlemen? Why is the government only showing you one segment of this entire case? You saw the front and the back of the diary and a smattering of pages. There's a lot more in this story. You didn't see anything about stuff that would exonerate Maxwell or Epstein. She continues, says, Miss Farmer told you that she met Boyce Schiller when she was going to be a witness in the Roberts case. Remember, Virginia Giuffray Roberts was suing several people. Farmer said she went and talked to those lawyers and she was going to be a witness for Giuffray. Menninger now changes gears, turns over to Kate. Kate we see down here. Kate filled out a very special visa, a U visa application for exceptional people. She's a music therapist. And Menninger says she is exceptional. She helps people. Now, she came out, she testified today that she was using a pseudonym because of her child. But she used her own name in court after Epstein's death. Why is that? She sued Epstein. She went after Epstein previously. As soon as he died, used her own name there, but not here. Now she's saying it's because she's got a kid. Interesting story. Kate also claims that she met Maxwell in London when she was younger than 17. She said it was at that house with the red door. Look at it. And that's across the street from that Nag's Head pub. Now, remember Nag's Head pub? That was the pub in the UK that allegedly Ghislaine Maxwell lived across the street. And they were going to try to get that UK witness out here, but they were not able to do that because he was in the UK and the judge said, you're out of time. But Kate was saying that they met in that mansion. That's where the massages first took place. And none of that has really been corroborated. So you can see what Menninger is doing here now. She's just going down just a checklist and just knocking out all the different witnesses and all the different victims. You can see that Inner City Press is sort of is taking the different nodes, kind of modular. So we just see that she just takes a strike at Kate. Next tweet, she's going after Carolyn now. Says, okay, well, now let's talk about Carolyn. Carolyn got up here, says she saw a photograph of Ghislaine Maxwell pregnant. That's hilarious. Very interesting that she's saying that because guess what? Nobody else saw this. Nobody. So what is she up here for? I'll tell you, it's very easy. Money. The first time ever that Maxwell was accused of anything by Carolyn, guess when that was? It was during the compensation process. Okay, and if you recall, I'm sure that Inner City Press is just being diplomatic and nice about a lot of this, but I'm sure that Menninger is probably going pretty hard at her about a lot of her inconsistencies. She had a lot of problems remembering things, and her testimony was pretty bad all around. Menninger says, okay, remember Sean, Carolyn's ex-boyfriend? Yeah, remember that total loser out there? He's got his felony convictions. Remember when Caroline was up on the stand saying that she had a drug problem and she was trying to minimize that? Remember, she was in and out of rehab, addicted to multiple things. I think she may have even been detoxing, or she may have been on methadone or something. Who knows? But Sean told you that they were abusing marijuana, cocaine, ecstasy, and other drugs. Okay, Caroline got up here and said not that big of a deal. Sean said, no, we were hitting it hard. They shared a phone during their drug binges. And they shared calls, both from Kellen and Epstein. So these were two drug addicts who were wandering around, and up until very recently, there were no complaints against Ghislaine Maxwell. In fact, if you recall, Carolyn filed lawsuits, met with lawyers and filed lawsuits. And presumably, her lawyer said, is this everybody who abused you? And she said yes. And guess who was not on that list? Ghislaine Maxwell. Menninger says, okay, now, they brought out this woman, Dr. Aracchio. You can see her down there in the bottom right. Dr. Aracchio, Menninger calls her the ultimate victim apologist. Says she's not trained to question accusers' accounts. She doesn't ask the accusers anything. She believes all women. All the time, no matter what. She's the ultimate victim apologist. Says if you take a look at her analysis, her 5 factors, it's a neat little structure she's got. But there's no evidence that Ghislaine Maxwell groomed anyone. Not at all. Kate was dating a man Maxwell's age, in fact. So not being groomed by Epstein or Maxwell if she's in a loving relationship with somebody else. Defense attorney Menninger continues. Says the government has no basis at all to say that Maxwell wrote the document about her relationship with Epstein. This document is told in the third person. It's not authenticated. They are trying to use that as evidence that she wrote it, but there is no proof that she did. So when they bring this document out, ladies and gentlemen, and they say, 12 years and we're never apart and we're just two little lovebirds, it's not reliable. There's no proof of that. And it's a good question, she says, but we heard from all these people who were really abused in this case. We heard from Kate and Carolyn, and we heard from Jane, and we heard from Annie. But we heard another name in this trial that came up a lot. Virginia Roberts Giuffray. Remember that? You heard her a lot. Why didn't she testify? Anybody answer that one? If she could corroborate what Carolyn told you. Remember, Carolyn said that she was recruited by Virginia. If that's true, and she could corroborate that, why didn't she? Why would a proper Oxford-educated woman do this? Why might Virginia Giuffray not want to come in and testify? Menninger says, you remember pilot Larry Visosky? Yeah, he said he signed a non-disclosure agreement. He says people don't want to talk about famous people flying on his plane. People like John Glenn. People like Bill Clinton. That's why he signed the NDA. There's not like anything weird. Nothing going on there that's problematic. He just doesn't want people to feel uncomfortable having their privacy rights violated. Fly in peace and privacy. And Menninger continues, says Epstein put his helicopter in the name of Air Ghislaine. That's why there was $7 million. That's why. Rich people do that. Epstein was generous. He was building a lodge at Interlaken that was handicapped accessible. He loved the handicapped people. That's how much he loves America and humanity. It's got ramps all over the place. So that explains the tricky financial maneuvering. That's all. Menninger continues, says certainly no one from JP Morgan told you what that money was for. And she's just on a tear. So as she's going through her closing, Judge Nathan now stands up and says, all right, hold on, Miss Menninger. Hold on a minute. All right. Pause. Break time. Says we're going to take a real quick stretch break. And so they do. Everybody just kind of, gets ready. Ghislaine Maxwel stands up, stretches, and sits down. You're free to do that right now if you'd like. Menninger continues. Get back in your seats. Menninger says, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alessi told you when women other than Ghislaine visited, he would take her photo down. Remember that little story there? Why would he do that? If she was his lover and they were in a romantic relationship, why would the photos need to come down? Menninger says Alessi was not doing a good job. Does being a tough boss make you an enforcer of a code of silence? Alessi, she says, doesn't really authenticate the black address book. Does he? Because it's not actually the address book. Remember Alessi said, I recall a book that kind of looks like that, because the book that they had that they admitted into evidence was not actually the book that Alessi used, because he had already left the employment at that time. So this book was created after the fact. Now, it still got admitted into evidence because it's kind of the same thing, and the judge admitted it because it's sort of another iteration of something that Alessi was familiar with. But she's making the argument that it's not authenticated. And if the government really wanted to make sure that it was authenticated, very easy. They could just bring in the other staff, but they didn't do that. In fact, she says, that's because this is not true. Alessi made up a bunch of stuff. The story he told you itself was not true. He didn't break in to help anybody. He told you the story that he was in there to go be a savior. That's not why he went in there. It was to steal a gun. You can't trust this man's word. Don't listen to what he says. Juan Alessi, not John, is dishonest, and he cannot be held to be reliable. She continues on. Menninger says, Ladies and gentlemen, you also heard from our expert, Dr. Loftus. Memory doesn't work like a tape recorder. You cannot rewind it and just hit play. It's very complicated. We have the barbell strategy. We have the different functional processing of the brain, the memory. Some of it's real, some of it's absolutely not real, and some of it's sort of real. But in this case, ladies and gentlemen, none of these interviews were recorded. Nothing is documented on the record. These are all women who have come out after the fact, and we have documented and shown you that every one of them had a plan. What was the plan? To get money. You heard the government come out time and again. They'd ask over and over again, "Are you sure there was no abuse in New Mexico?" Dr. Dubin was solid on what she said happened. Ava Dubin Anderson came out. The only Ava that anybody has produced in this trial, the only person that might be able to corroborate what Jane said, she came out and said absolutely did not participate in any group activities at all. So now I want to pay close attention to this final couple sentences from Laura Menninger, because this is very good. She's going to boil this down to the exact nuts and bolts that are necessary for the jurors to make decisions. Menninger says, ladies and gentlemen, it's very simple. Counts 2 and 4. They rely on Jane. If you do not believe Jane, drop the counts. Easy. Count 6 relies on Carolyn. If you do not believe Carolyn, drop count 6. All you need to know. She says Ghislaine is being tried here for being with Jeffrey Epstein. It might have been the biggest mistake of her life, but it is not a crime. Acquit her. She slams shut her binder. She turns around. She fist bumps all the defense attorneys. They sit down. Judge Nathan says, all right, let's take a break, folks. And those are closing arguments. Now, the prosecutors are unhappy. They say, Judge, Laura read from an email that was previously precluded. And we want a curative instruction. And the judge says, well, just take it easy over there. There's already a curative instruction in the charges, the charging document that I'm about to read. Now, that happens. We still are not done, folks. Closing arguments continue on. Now, this is a bit shorter because this is the rebuttal close. And so we get a rebuttal close here because technically the government has the burden of proof. And so they get to go twice because that's what the government does. Government prosecutor Maruene Comey, daughter of James Comey, comes out, takes the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, Ghislaine Maxwel touched 3 witnesses' breasts. The defense just came out here, tried to get you to look away. They want you to look over the massive amount of evidence that Miss Moe walked you through this morning. You saw it in this exhibit. You saw the list of these names. You saw these invoices. Who on earth needs that many massages? Who could possibly go through all of that? And who could participate in setting up all these massages and not know any better? Maxwell knew. She was in the room. She knew exactly what was happening. The $30 million she got is the "we did this together" money. It's her payday. It's her payoff for delivering the goods to Jeffrey Epstein. Comey continues and says, people who prey on children did not leave behind documents. The defendant was not walking out of massage rooms and writing a memo. Today I touched Jane's breasts. It's not how this works, folks. So we have to look at the flight logs. Epstein flying to New Mexico. then leaving a year later with Miss Maxwell. We are looking at the records that matter. There's not formal documentation about this abuse. Of course not. That's ridiculous. Don't expect that. What Miss Menninger is trying to do is trying to mislead you. The flight logs show it. The locations show it. The testimony shows it. In fact, listen to the defense's own expert. You remember Professor Loftus? She came out here and talked about memory. Remember that? She said some things you never forget. You know, those moments that change your life. Imagine you had to remember Thanksgiving from years ago. And turkey happens every time. You know that. You know that you're going to have mashed potatoes and stuffing. But that's a routine event. That's not a moment that changes your life. That's not one of those things that you never forget. She says, which would out more? Or which would, I think, matter more? How old you were on Mike Wallace's birthday? Or how old you were when a middle-aged man assaulted you? All the defense can argue is she was 16 nor 14 when this happened. Still a crime. Doesn't matter. 16 or 14. Still a crime, she says. And she goes back to Dr. Loftus's argument and says, it's like the stuffing at Thanksgiving. It's there every time. Look at these photos, she says. She's showing them up on the screen. We, of course, can't see them. Carolyn named Maxwell as one of the two people who would set up the massages. She told Sean that she couldn't pronounce the name because it's complicated. A lot of people still can't pronounce that name. It's okay, Sean. She continues. There is not a shred of evidence that a group of lawyers, she says here, got together and made up a story about Maxwell. The defense is trying to make you believe that all of this is about money, that all these stories are just being made up out of thin air. They said that Caroline didn't have any complaints against Maxwell until the very last minute. Like there's this big conspiracy. But guess what? The lawyers got their money before this trial started. Everybody's been paid already. This has nothing to do about money. In fact, why would everybody here show up? Why would the ex-boyfriends come here and lie to you? Why would Juan Alessi come here and lie to you? Why would all these people who didn't get paid come here and make this up? The defense is trying to dirty these people up. Alessi, yeah, he admitted he stole something. He's been totally honest with you. He's been as forthcoming as can be. They are rubbing his name in the dirt. They're saying he's a thief and a liar. He's here, ladies and gentlemen. He's here right before you telling you, yeah, I stole. He's got no reason to lie. So she says if they wanted to frame Maxwell, if all these lawyers were a part of this big conspiracy, they would have gone deeper. But no, they're not here as part of a conspiracy. They're here testifying for justice. The defendant is guilty. Judge Nathan says, thank you, Ms. Comey. I will now read the charge. And the charge, of course, jury instructions, and this is a big one, big long one, because we have a number of different charges involving some complex issues. And so Judge Nathan is going to be reading from a document that looks like this. We are not going to read all of the jury instructions because, as you can see up here, they are 83 pages long. And a lot of it is pretty much, standard boilerplate jury instructions. A lot of it's going to read a lot like a lot of the other jury instructions that we have read here on this channel. But this is a little bit of an interesting section. This one is worth spending a quick minute on. It's 3 pages. It's 3 out of the 83 pages. But what they're talking about are these conspiracy charges, okay? Counts 1, 3, and 5. Conspiracy to violate the law. So they go through a series of different analyses, and this is the judge now writing to the jurors, okay? So to frame this out a little bit, the jurors are now going to be given a big fat stack of papers, 83 pages of jury instructions, and they just listen to everything. They're going to have to take this packet back and go, All right, I guess we better get through this thing, right? And start reading this. Now, I don't know how many people read on a regular basis. I don't know how many people read novels, or books on a regular basis, but probably not as many as you might think. And so for somebody like a juror to be handed a big stack of, big book of 83 pages and go, ugh. And this is not like a Harry Potter book, right? This is really thick language. It's really legalese. It's annoying. And so now you're supposed to be giving them this task of processing all of this data they just heard and all of these instructions and cobbling it together. It's very complicated business. And so what ends up happening, I think, is most people just kind of go with their gut. But let's take a look and see what this actually says, because they're going to be giving us some guidance on how to deliberate. We're talking about conspiracy, just a conspiracy to move all this stuff around, not the actual engagement in any physical activities with anybody, just the conspiracy. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you believe that the government has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that there was a conspiracy, then you must also consider whether Maxwell participated in it. Okay, so you have to first, right, think about sort of building a house. If Maxwell's a part of a conspiracy, you got to show there was a conspiracy in the first place. So if the jurors believe there was a conspiracy, now we have to decide, is Maxwell in it or not? Here's how we do that. In order to satisfy that second element, we have to decide whether Maxwell knowingly or willfully entered into the conspiracy with a criminal intent. Okay, so she entered into this with a purpose to violate the law. She agreed to take part in the conspiracy to promote the illegalities. Okay, so you can see how this can be complicated now. Maxwell knowingly and willfully entered into this conspiracy. Okay, well, what does knowingly and willingly mean? It's a good question. So they give us instructions now. All right, so we're going to have to take this sentence. You see what's happening? We have to take this sentence up that is sort of built with, A plus B equals C. We have to take, what does A mean? All right, well, A means this, willingly and knowingly. An act is done willingly or knowingly if it's done deliberately and purposefully. Don't you love it? That is, Maxwell's actions have been her conscious objective rather than a product of a mistake or accident. Okay, conscious objective. She intended to do this thing. It was done deliberately and purposely, therefore it was done knowingly and willingly. So to satisfy this burden, the government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was a member of a conspiracy set out to accomplish an unlawful purpose. In this case, it would have been trafficking, and that it was her conscious objective to do that. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't careless. It wasn't anything that was negligent. Now, the judge is telling the jurors, as I have said, knowledge is a matter of inference from proven facts. Science has not devised a manner yet of looking into somebody's mind and knowing what a person is thinking. However, you do have before you evidence about certain acts and conversations, and all of us took place involving Maxwell or in her presence. So you can consider this evidence into making your determination. Says jurors, it is for you to determine whether the government establishes beyond a reasonable doubt. It's important for you to know that this participation in a conspiracy, it must be established by independent evidence of her own actions or statements, as well as those as other alleged co-conspirators and other reasonable inferences. Right? So there's a lot of gray area here. Maxwell didn't say much of anything. So was she a part of that conspiracy? Does that statement that was read into the record justify that? Court says it's not necessary for the government to show that she was, fully informed about all the details. You don't have to know everything in order to be guilty. You don't even have to know every other member of the conspiracy. So there might be other people who are part of this conspiracy that you don't know anything about. That's okay. You can still be a part of it. In addition, the judge says, the duration, the extent of the participation doesn't have any bearing on guilt. She didn't have to be at the beginning. She didn't have to stay around until the end. It doesn't matter whether her role in the conspiracy may have been more limited than others, as long as she was a participant. So you don't create a hierarchy of the different conspirators. Epstein was like 60% and Ghislaine was like 40%. Therefore, Ghislaine is not part of it. No, she's a part of it. If you're in, you're in. But you also have to take a look at these reasonable inferences that you can glean from other facts and conversations. Now, the judge says, warning, even though she doesn't have to know about it or know all of the other co-conspirators or know all the details of this thing, she does need to know a little bit of something and be actually involved. I want to caution you, she warns the jurors. Miss Maxwell's mere presence at the scene does not by itself make her a member of this conspiracy. Okay, just the fact that she's there. She's in New Mexico, she's in New York or Palm Beach, or she's palling around with these people, that alone is not enough. If a person may know or assemble or be friendly with or, kind of hang out with one or more members of a conspiracy without being a conspirator herself, that's okay. You're allowed to do that. I want to caution you that mere knowledge, mere acquiescence without participation is also not sufficient. In other words, knowledge without agreement and participation is not sufficient. So, if Maxwell knew, in other words, knowledge without agreement and participation is not sufficient. So if Maxwell knew but did not participate, that's not enough to make her a part of this conspiracy, is what this judge is saying. So they have to make sure that they can prove that she was participating in it. What is necessary is that Maxwell did participate in the conspiracy with knowledge of the purpose and with the intent to aid in the unlawful objectives. It's not necessary that she get any financial benefit. That doesn't matter. As long as she's participating in the conspiracy itself, that's enough. Once the conspiracy is formed, it's presumed to continue until it's completed or until you disassociate yourself from it. So you can terminate a conspiracy, but once you're a member, you're presumed to continue to be a member until it's terminated or until you have some affirmative proof that you've disassociated yourself from it. So, in other words, what they're saying is, if she was a part of this conspiracy, she has to affirmatively say, I'm no longer a part of it, in order to be withdrawn from the conspiracy. But that's sort of irrelevant here because she's not getting any benefits or any brownie points from leaving the conspiracy. She's still being charged with the crime. In sum, with an understanding of the unlawful nature of the conspiracy, the defendant may have intentionally engaged, advised, or assisted for the purpose of furthering an illegal undertaking. If that is the case, the defendant thereby becomes a knowing and willing participant in the unlawful agreement. That is to say, she becomes a conspirator. So, right, pretty low standard. I think a jury could easily find that there's kind of enough there to meet that standard of being in the conspiracy. Now, there's other elements, right? That was 3 pages out of 83 pages. So that continues on to prove the other elements of those charges. But that was just the conspiracy portion of that. There's still a lot of additional analysis to go through. And so there's going to be other sentences that maybe a juror latches onto and says, well, not so fast, really. I didn't see that there in that one location with that one victim. And so I'm excited to see what the jurors do with all of this. Now, Judge Nathan, as we saw, is continuing to read the charges in court this afternoon, was reading the entire document, gets to page 50 of 83. Says, quote, when Jane was under the age of 17, Maxwell participated in multiple group encounters with Epstein and Jane. That was the allegation. While readout continues, they're tweeting over here. And so we get some of these different counts. The judge is now advising about what the maximum penalties are. Count 1, conspiracy to entice a minor, 5 years. Enticing, 5 years. Conspiracy to transport, 5 years. Transporting with the intent to engage, 10 years. Conspiracy to commit, 5 years. Trafficking, 40 years. With a maximum there. Judge Nathan continues to read the charge. Sorry about that. Now it's almost over. She's reading 83 pages, one sentence after another, in front of the jurors. So you can see how people might just start falling asleep. Time is now 4:39 in the afternoon. Not sure how much deliberation could occur today. Judge says, we're going to be sticking around till 6 p.m. So Judge Nathan finally says, I'm sure if you listen to the views of your fellow jurors, they decide what the alternate jurors are. 5 jurors have now been labeled. We got 125, 149, 151, 152, and 170 are going to be named the alternates. And so they're going to be standing by on call. Miss Williams, the judge says, is going to show you how to access the admitted exhibits. All rise. The jurors rise. And they go back into the deliberation room, it sounds like. Judge Nathan advises the counsel in the court, says, all right, well, I guess that's it, folks. We're going to wait to hear back from the jurors. I want to thank the 8 counsel that are all here today. I learned a lot from you. Marshals take Maxwell out of the courtroom. But if the jurors have any questions, they're going to bring her back in. And that, my friends, is it. We're in deliberation mode for the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, waiting for a verdict. And we're going to continue to follow it along. I know there's a lot of people that we need to talk to, people like Joe Neerman, Good Logic. We've got Inner City Press. We've got Addy Ads. There's a lot of people out there doing some amazing work following this case. And so everybody's going to be on pins and needles these next few days to see if we get any jury questions. If anybody's coming out here asking anything, we want to see what they're asking about, whether it matters or if it leads to any hints about how they might rule on this case. And so we're going to follow along. I hope you join us. Let's take a look at some of the questions that came in over from watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And Dr. EMB at the start of the show gave a very generous super chat. Says, Merry Christmas to R&R Law Group. Doctor, that's so nice and so generous. I appreciate you being here. You're super supportive. It means the world. I'm glad that you're here. I wish you a Merry Christmas. Hope you're doing well out there. The good doctor's in the house, hopefully doing well with this new wave of whatever's coming through. So be safe, be well, and Merry Christmas, Doc. Just Cows is in the house. That's so nice of you, Just. You don't have to do that, my friend. But thank you. Merry Christmas, Rob. Much love. That's from the mod. That's from, he's moderating over there, along with K-Bean. We've got Zulu over there. Keep in order. I know Vienticus was in here earlier, but he had to jet, and I appreciate all of their help as well. And then Viva is here. Whoa, it says next year for Christmas, you have to do a Robert Gruller reads children's books. Not even joking. I would buy it. Great work as always. That's from Viva. Well, thank you, Viva. That's fun. Should I read it in my angry prosecutor voice? I don't think so. I don't think that the kids would like that one, but I appreciate it, Viva. I love the work that you're doing, my friend. I had a lot of fun talking with you the other day. Looking forward to doing a lot more of that. I appreciate you having us on and continuing to plow ahead and sort of lead the way in a lot of different things. Thank you for that, Viva. All right. And so let's take a look over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com and see what is coming in here from our friends over there. And what have I done here? All right. Yes, former LEO says the fix was in when very experienced lawyers end up looking like rookies. All I can say is trust me. That's from former LEO in the house. Oh, and I wanted to give a special shout out to Sergeant Bob and Miss Lucky. Guess who came by the office today? Sergeant Bob and Miss Lucky. They were just traveling through Phoenix. They stopped by. We got to hang out for about 20 minutes in the office. Learned a lot about him. Sergeant Bob is going to be giving us a little bit of a talk about his book at our next monthly locals meetup, and I'm looking forward to that. He's a sergeant, very applicable to what we talk about here. Awesome people. I had a lot of fun meeting with you. Thanks for taking the time. Kincaid says, good evening, sir, Rob and all. Do you agree with the government's second chance for closing? No, I don't. When was the last time a fundamental court procedures were changed? Due to the incorporation of advanced sociological mythology, do you think a revision is needed or possible? No, I don't think it's fair at all. Of course I don't think it's fair. It's ridiculous. Why do they get 2 cracks at it? It's nonsense. They should get 1 shot, and we should get 1 shot. And that's it. Or if they get 2, we should get 2. It's total BS. I don't like it at all. And there's no legal basis for that other than the fact that it makes our job harder. Look, the reality is the legal basis for this is because it's beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a really high burden. It's really difficult for the government to overcome that really momentous hurdle. And so they need 2 opportunities. The fact is, folks, the jurors don't, it's a topsy-turvy world. Okay, most jurors think that the defendant, just by virtue of sitting there, is guilty. So the fact that society is so topsy-turvy that the presumption of innocence has been so watered down that people just look at a defendant and they just, oh, that guy, he did it. What are we here for? I don't care what the charge is. Look at him. He did it. And so then in addition to that, the cards are already stacked against the defendant. We already have multi-billion-dollar law enforcement agencies that have, been, $1 billion year after year after hundreds of millions of dollars that are funding these mega law enforcement organizations, hundreds of prosecutors, thousands of law enforcement personnel. They've got more money than anybody. All the rules are stacked in their favor. And then you give them 2 closing arguments. Get out of here. Give me a break. It's not fair. Not fair at all. Jerks. God, what a joke. All right, we have another one here from Thunder 7. Says, I don't see how the jury can convict when the so-called victims, Comey's team, picked were prostitutes who willingly participated. They're not even part of the trafficking. Despite the salacious details, it's no different than reporting on a bordello in Nevada. Yucky, but not criminal. Being friends or business partners with a pervert and being a pervert yourself is not a crime. I see a hung jury coming, which was the goal from the beginning, not to open up the Pandora's box of what really went on and who was involved. Yeah, it is yucky, but not criminal. I think that's a good legal bucket. You have yucky and criminal, then you have yucky, but not criminal, which is, I like it. Kincaid says, are those torpedoes boxed? Who does that? I don't know. Maybe they were like stocking stuffers or something. Maybe he was regifting those. Are they a his and hers set? Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't get into the mechanics of these things. I can't. I can't do it. During development, do you think some thought better about the name for PE? Yeah, I don't know. And lotions. Do you have any idea how hard it is to keep blood-drinking lizard skin hydrated? Oh, so that's a good reason. Yeah, I forgot about that. The scales, you get dried out pretty quickly. The lizard people, right? So that's why they have all the tubes in the showers. It's just like squirting all over the place. It's like, oh gosh, this is a lot of work. Oh man. Okay, let's continue on. Sergeant Bob is here. Says Moe presentation is very powerful. Yeah, Moe's was good. Hers was good. Both sides were good. I mean, the prosecutors, I thought, did a good job. The defense did a good job. Sergeant Bob also here says, not too hard for a pilot to glance at a passenger and think a 14 to 16-year-old was a bit older. Besides, a pilot has a lot more going on than a quick glance at any passengers. Yeah, and he kind of has his own skin to save a little bit, right? He can't come out there and be like, yeah, I mean, 14, easy, sure. 16, sure. Yeah, obviously. Yeah, I mean, no, they definitely were not 18. That's obvious, right? He's not going to come out and say that. He's... No, I mean, borderline, but above 18. So they weren't 17 and 9 months. No, they were 18. How can you tell? Nobody can. But, he's going to hold that line. It feels like post facto justification more than anything there, Sergeant Bob. I think he knew what was going on there. Kincaid says, given the prosecution's self-imposed limitations and the defense's focus on the 2008 case, it seems almost sure that the jury will be confused. Am I correct in thinking there's no physical evidence of Maxwell's acts? Regardless of the outcome, an appeal and civil agreement are very likely. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they have any evidence of anything like a physical specimen, if that's what you're asking for. Haven't seen anything like that. C. Rose is here, says the feds had a weak case on the merits, and I don't think the prosecutors carried their burden. I have Maxwell walking. Was there any defining moment in this trial that proved Maxwell's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt I may have missed? I don't think so. I mean, look, let's go through the strengths of the cases. You've got 4 different victims. 4 different victims with similar stories is a difficult thing to overcome. Okay, this is just a standard prosecutor tactic. They need to come up with comparable cases in order to justify as a pattern of behavior. So, for example, if you have one person who comes forward and says, person A abused me, that person comes forward and now it's just a he said, she said story unless there's other corroborating evidence. Right? It's unless there's a witness or unless there's DNA or some evidence or there's camera or recording or text messages or something. But if none of that exists and it's just a purely he said, she said situation, he did this, I didn't want that to happen, no evidence, this, maybe she reports it, 6 months later. So any of the evidence is gone. It's very difficult for a prosecutor to do anything with that. Very difficult. So what they have to do then is get multiple of those patterns. Okay, well, we have one of those cases that we didn't get much good data on, and we have another one that sounds similar where we have a little bit more. We have some other ones where we're missing some of what's in case A, but we have more of what's in case C. And so we kind of, if we have 4 different cases, then we can kind of piece together one good case. Or we can see enough here that there's a pattern that we can convince a jury that this is this person's MO. So here, the government has that, right? They've got 4 victims, and they're showing a pattern, and there's a similar story, and they're all following more or less the same train tracks, which is all good. You have a couple people who are, tell more persuasive stories. Annie Farmer, which I think may not even be a named victim anymore. And then you have Kate, which, had some good testimony, and Jane had some good testimony, but Carolyn's testimony was pretty bad. But even of all of those things, I'm not sure that you're going to get a full, solid. I mean, I think Jane is probably the strongest victim of all of them. I'd be curious to see what some other people think about that. But no, I don't think you're missing anything. There's no slam dunk, video evidence or video photograph of Ghislaine and Annie or Ghislaine and Jane or Ghislaine. There's no direct evidence of this. This is all sort of, inferential. Good question, C. Rose. I'm not thinking of anything. Jeremy Matrita says, Rob, your recounting of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial has been excellent. I think you should compile them into an audiobook. The trial of, written and performed by Robert Gruller, Esquire. I feel like I'm right there in the courtroom. Not sure what the rules of evidence are after a trial concludes, but you could even include your mind map and photos for the hard copy. Well, that's funny. Thank you, Jeremy, for that. It's a very nice compliment. I don't know that anybody wants to relive any of this, but I appreciate it. Kincaid says, I am visually impaired and had a joke loaded up, something about chairs streamlining the process, but Epstein is not really a hands-free kind of guy. So I see what you did there. Epstein is not a hands-free kind of guy at all. He likes to be very involved. We've got Grouchy Old Cat Lady says, back in the 60s, there were in-home personally fitted bra salesmen. Definitely handled my breasts. Do I get to collect $1.5 million? And if I bought one, I had to pay her. Oh, well, it was a girl, right? So it's female? Saleswoman. All right. No, because it's female. I think it's okay if it's female. That's hilarious. In the 60s, personally fitted bra saleswoman. Definitely handled my breasts. Do I get to collect one? I don't know. Sue them. Are they still around? You can file a lawsuit. Grouchy Old Cat Lady. Don't think you'll recover. But News Now says, good logic says there is enough reasonable doubt with the evidence presented. It will be interesting if the jury determines only the evidence presented without putting feelings in. Yeah, I mean, sounds about right. What evidence? They went for 8 days, folks. They had 8 days. Derek Chauvin was 11 days. What a joke. All right. So, yeah, I mean, sounds about right. Kincaid says that word is slang for maps. I don't know what that means, Kincaid, but thank you for that. And Grouchy Old Cat Lady says, so wish they'd broadcast the trial so we could only see the jury, what the jury witnesses. It would be a lot easier to decide. Yeah, it would be a lot easier to decide. And if you can actually see the people who are testifying and you can see their body language, you can judge their credibility so much better than you can just reading a transcript, right? Because you can tell. Sometimes people will say stuff and it's not, it doesn't look genuine. It doesn't look credible. The words are credible. You can read it and you go, that makes sense. But the way they deliver it, you're like, that's a liar right there. So you don't get to see any of that when we're only observing this from the angles that we're observing it from. And so that, my friends, is it for us for the day, which means we're back here tomorrow to do this all again. Same place, same location. And I'm not sure if we're going to have a verdict yet or not, but we're going to continue to follow along. And in the meantime, we've got a lot of other additional stories to cover. And I want to make sure you're around here to join us as we do that. And so before we get out of here, let's welcome some new members over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. Big welcomes over to Falcone USNY. We've got is here. Reen signed up, not RWC110. Chuck David, Mark on W. We've got Shindog, Nosy, Texas Rosie, Tay's mom. We have Taz mom. We have Cookie Monster 2, AJ Darsha, Molly Pop Inc., Guitar Terry, Randy J98, Westworld, Equestrian Girl, Richie DC, Red Jersey, Nikki Dragon, Things and Stuff. We got Donna 107, The Vez, Jimmy W, Big Dother Bites, Kimmy Cato 3, Kevin AZ, Antar 24, Queen of Tennessee, Rebby Lee, Music Box Lady, Bigry, Phantasmagloria. We've got Black Cat Meow, Nick McLeod, Dr. Brenton, T. Blakemore, and Patriot Minute. And I want to give shout outs to everybody over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com, chatting away over there. Big shout outs over to B Spec. Jeremy Matrita is in the house. We've got Bumma Lick It or Boom I Like It, depending on who you ask. Jumpin' Jeff is in the house as well. And thank you everybody for keeping that chat cozy over there. We have over on Rumble, we've got Vienticus Prime was over there. We've got It's All Political 2020. TYCH News is over there. Manis 69. And we've got Hike and Marrier over on Rumble, which is great. We got a little bit more activity over there on Rumble. So we've got a second platform. And of course, to our friends over on YouTube. Shout outs to Zulu, Just Cause. We got Texas Beast. We have Jason Lewis, Curtis Bartle, Katie. K Bean is here. We have Trent Warmer. I haven't seen Lean today. There's Lean. Hey, Lean. Good to see you. We have Jay Butcher, and many others are chatting away on YouTube. And everybody, thank you for being a part of the show today. We're going to do it all again tomorrow. Same time, same place. 4 p.m. Arizona time, which is Mountain. 5 is Central. 6 p.m. on the East Coast. Back over to 3 p.m. on the West Coast. And so, my friends, have a tremendous evening. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.